Welcome to Blue Talks.
Hello everyone, I'm so glad to be here to share with you how it is I came to trust that love is at the heart of reality, even beyond death. It may have started when I was just a little infant, because I had had a lot of surgeries, 3 months old, 7 years old, 8 years old. And so I had anesthesia and had unconscious trips probably in my mind, but who knows. But what really, I was always fascinated by the unseen. But what really happened was when I was an 11-year-old and everyone in my living room felt really lugubrious, and I was there practicing the piano, and all of a sudden, eventually, they told me my beloved granddaddy had died. And he was the one who, when I was a little kid, and 2 years old, in a crib, and I was at his house, he would come up the stairs and say, "Good," and I would say, "Morning." "Good morning." So there was something about call and response that I always loved my whole life and still do. So when I heard he had died, I just was devastated, and I ran to my room, jumped on my bed, and soaked my pillow in tears. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I started feeling some kind of presence above my head, like, could it be? Do you think he's really there? Could he be watching out over me? He's still somewhere? And I started to feel comforted that he had come there to me. And so, did I tell anyone? No. And I don't think little children often tell families when they have these experiences. So I tucked it in my memory bank, and that's where it landed. But fast forward, after I got married and we had a wonderful year in Nigeria and then 6 years in Thailand, that's when I got plunged into meditation, Buddhism, and the fact that there's something greater that we all are beyond our physical self. Because the meditation led me to some deeper meditation experiences, and one of them was a retreat at a woman's house. And I had a couple of experiences, well, quite a lot of experiences, but one of them, at the end of 7 days, made me want to actually quit and go home. And it was when I found myself in the ceiling of the bedroom, looking down at my body. And oh my God, how am I going to get back into my body? And wiggled my fingers and toes, and somehow I got back in. But I jumped up, I ran downstairs, called my husband on the phone, and it was one of those days where he was up country visiting health clinics, so he wasn't home. And so then I succumbed and knocked on my teacher's door, woke her up, and she said, "Well, the Buddha didn't have a nice air-conditioned room," which was like shaming me for wanting to leave. But then she made me go in front of her altar and rededicate myself. "You agreed to 30 days, so okay." So I stayed for the next 3 weeks, because that was the end of the first week. And I didn't have that experience again, but I did have a lot of very strange experiences. Some were really wonderful, like having yoga postures come through me, and I had never done yoga before. That's probably from a previous life. But one experience was when I was supposed to be watching my mind, and if I had thoughts, I was supposed to say thinking. If I was walking, I was supposed to be aware of my legs and my walking, but it was like lickety-split. The thoughts were coming too fast, and I felt like I was going to die. And at the same time, I had this involuntary breathing starting to happen to me, like something outside of myself was coming in and breathing me. I could not stop it. I felt like I'm going to die. So I just lay down on the bed, surrendered, and I allowed myself to die if that was going to happen, but it didn't happen. But it was at the end of the 30 days, so I said this was it, time to leave. So I did go home. But after that, I met someone who introduced me to this wonderful, wonderful man who was the abbot of a monastery And I started studying with him, and he was helping me make sense of what happened to me during that month-long retreat. And at another time, I told him, I admitted I'm a little scared of dying. And he laughed and he said, "Death, no such thing. We live right on." Well, that didn't encourage me totally, because I thought, I don't think I want to be a mind without a body, as I had experienced, when I was up there, out of my body. But anyway, fast forward again, I started studying with a lot of different teachers, because we went back home. I needed a place to sit in silence, and I sat with the Quakers. And then I took yoga classes. And then eventually, I met a Jain master, and I studied with him for 7 years. Oh yes, and I went to India on 2 trips. And one of those trips, we were to take a vow at the top of a mountain. And I did take a vow, just remembering this. And my vow was to be a soothing, healing presence in the world. And that has never left me. So keep that in mind, because that explains some of the future things that I chose to do. So, and I studied, many different traditions: Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sufi, indigenous, Christian, as well as, nevertheless, being born Jewish. So as I said, I'm a Jubu, Jainudu, Suzu, Indigenu, which I laugh over, but it's true. And all of those paths led to my being very comfortable with, it seems, with end-of-life care, even though I hadn't had that experience, but I had an experience of myself almost feeling like I was going to die, and I just felt a lot of calmness and presence when I could be a companion to someone else. And that first someone else that I was with was my mother-in-law. She had had a heart valve replacement, and she was not waking up. She wasn't dead, but she hadn't woken up yet. And my husband and his brother had been there, but then they had to leave and go back to work, and so I was in charge of my father-in-law because he was no longer driving. So when I was at the hospital, and after he had visited with his wife, he went on to somewhere else, and I got to sit with my mother-in-law, whom I loved a lot. I was by her bedside, and I started talking to her, believing that she could hear. I had heard that people can hear, so I said to her, "You know what? You are made of love, and you always will be. And you now have a choice. You can choose to stay and try to recover, or you can leave. And if either way, you will be made of love. You will be totally made of love. And I love you." And I left because my father-in-law said, "We have to go home for lunch." An hour later, we came back, and the doctors whisked us off to another room, and my father-in-law said, "What are you saying? What's going on?" And he said, the doctor said, "We tried everything, she's gone." So I knew she had made that choice really fast. And I said, "Can we go down to her room?" And the doctors discouraged us, but of course we went down to the room, and as we're walking down to the room, I get this incredible, wonderful, melting, golden, warm, energetic, loving feeling enveloping me. And it had to have been her essence. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, she took the decision, and look what she became, her true self. But not only me, her 2 friends out of 3 that were meditating, they had a vision of her because they happened to be meditating at the same time as she left her body. And one of them saw her dancing in the cosmos, and another saw her smiling in Technicolor. So that was another confirmation of what I had experienced in that melting, enveloping feeling. And I'm assuming my father-in-law felt that too. So then my next experience was with my own father. He had been declared dead, and my husband and I were 3 hours away, so we had to drive like crazy to get there, where he was. And when I entered the room, I remembered what Ramana Maharshi, a great Hindu master, I had seen on a film, what he had said to do when someone is at the end of their life. You put one hand on their forehead and one hand on their heart. And I did that. And Ramana Maharshi said, even if it's an animal, you do it, whoever it is. So I put my hands there, and all of a sudden, I started feeling that same incredible being breathed feeling, as if something outside of me was breathing me, like the divine was breathing me. And everything became black and white and two-dimensional. And my husband noticed he didn't want me to faint. So he said, we got to get you out into the fresh air. So we got out into the fresh air, and I didn't faint. And later I asked Swami Chidananda, another wonderful Hindu saint that I had been studying with, what was that? And he said, you helped your father leave. And my mother, who used to say, when you're dead, you're dead, out, brief candle, she would just kind of joke around. She confessed to me that one night she felt a visitation from my father after he died. She saw him looking younger, and she felt enveloped by his embrace. He had hugged her. That's why, in the middle of the night, she found herself standing between the two twin beds. So she could no longer say, when you're dead, you're dead. And when she actually died, I was also with her in the last few months of her life. And she, who used to be a fairly resistant woman, she died so non-resistingly, I felt like she taught me how to die. Another example. And actually, when her coffin was placed next to my father's, my sister and I both independently got a feeling like a whoosh. And we both interpreted it independently. We weren't talking, as if my father was saying, thank you for bringing her back to me. So that was an experience at the ground of where they were buried. So the last experience I'm going to tell you about is a colleague of my husband, my late husband, who had a daughter that had a recurrence of ovarian cancer. And because she was not getting better, she had gone home to her parents' house. So I had been studying some healing, hands-on healing. So I used to go and put hands on the daughter, and my husband would go and be with the parents. And so I was hands-on with her that last day. Oh yes, my husband wasn't with me one of the last days I went to visit her. But I had decided just to sit there and be in silence with her for an hour. And then all of a sudden I got inspired. And I said, you are made of love. And you are able to make a choice now. Perhaps this is not an ending. Perhaps it's really a new beginning. And all that love you put into your horse, because she had a horse, and into your friends and your work, all that energy and love, maybe you can put it toward your next journey. Maybe it's really not an ending, but a new beginning. And I left, and I went home, and an hour later, the phone rang, and it was the head of the HARP program, whom I had met at World Trade Center conferences many years ago in the 80s. And I had wanted to study to play the harp for the dying, which is what she taught. But she was in a place where people had to go in person. But I knew that she had locally trained people, and I wanted to find a harpist for this young woman. So the phone rang when I got home, and she said the local harpist was in Vermont, and that was not close to Connecticut. But in the middle of that call with this woman, Therese Schroeder-Shaker, the mother called and said she's gone. So her daughter had made the choice to leave after I had been there and talked to her. So two things happened. One, later I told her mother what I had said to her daughter, and she was glad and asked me to speak at her memorial service, which was held in the stable where her daughter's horse was. And I did. And at the end of that, she the mother came out, we all came out, and she released some balloons into the sky. And I said, look, they had formed themselves into a horse shape, which was just another amazing proof to me that there's life beyond death, and lovingly so. But now this woman, Therese Schroeder-Schieker, I went back to that call, and she said, when I told her that the mother said the daughter had passed away, could this be the sign for your next step? I now have a program online, and you can do everything at home, all online, and just twice a year you come out to where I am, which was Mount Angel, Oregon, and we have residencies. So those would be 6 days each, twice a year. So I ended up, she said, if the program, when you read about it, makes your hair stand on end, sign up. Well, I signed up, and it became prophetic, because it ended up that after the first really half a year to a year of my being in the program, my own beloved husband got a terrible diagnosis of ALS, which is pretty much incurable. And even though he kept his sense of humor, because towards the end his doctor said, now will you have a trach? You know, a trach is when you can't breathe and you get it into your throat. He said, okay, I'll have one if you'll have one. He joked, you know, kept his sense of humor. But anyway, I ended up playing the harp for him, because in the middle of the night he said he couldn't sleep, maybe you should play the harp. 3 a.m., okay, brought the harp in, and from then on, I became his sleeping pill, and I was so glad I had learned how to play the harp. And so I did that. And I also played for him after he left his body, and I must admit, he was at home, and I heard, he was in another room, and I heard his last breath, which was a whoosh. It was such a deep, long breath. I thought, wow, he's going far. And I played the harp for him also at the end after he left, and sang to him. So after that, I used to keep his cell phone on my bureau in my bedroom. And if I couldn't sleep or I was not feeling well in the middle of the night, I'd see it light up to the ceiling. And then it would come back. And this happened many times during the year, even if I traveled and took that Palm Pilot with me. And sure enough, it would light up. And I felt like he was saying to me, I'm made of light. You've always known that. Now I know. And then another time, a year later, I had an unbirthday party for him. Because he was a big reproductive rights activist. He had been trained as an OBGYN doctor, but he went into global public health in his life work, and as the dean of the School of Public Health, and as well as starting the family planning program in Thailand. So in any case, I ended up having this fundraiser at my house as an unbirthday party for 2 women who were trying to make a film called Stories Women Don't Tell, about women around the world who are having threats to their reproductive rights. And so I had this event, and we had a birthday cake, an unbirthday cake, and the next morning, a robin came pecking at my front window. And I said, Robin, be careful. You might end up finding your beak gets hurt. And then I went into another room, and again, peck, peck, peck in that window. And then I went to another room, peck, 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 back to the front window, and there's the robin. I said, okay, I gave up. Do you have a message for me? And I closed my eyes, and I heard, thank you for what you did the other night. I didn't make it up. He was communicating with me. And so, from all these experiences, and from my taking the program, learning to play the harp for the dying, which is still something I want to continue to explore, because I did quit the program after the 3 years and did not get certified. But it's still a longing for me to be a companion to people at the end of their lives, because I feel like I have a calling and some way to share my love for companionship at that time. And so Thank you for listening. I really enjoyed sharing with you these stories, and I hope it inspires you to feel that at the end of our lives, it's not a real ending, it's just a new beginning. Thank you.